Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Light the W podcast. As always, I'm your host, Mahal. Make sure you leave a like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review, all of that fantastic jazz. If it's your first time joining, make sure you follow on social media at Light the W pod on all of that. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, we're active on all of those. So, without further ado, let's sound the horn and get into this episode.
The pitch from Acevedo.
Swung on the line, down the left field line for a base hit. Fly ball, gap, right center field. And
Double him up at second.
Luke is going back to the 1-8 track. Get out the right, running mustard grandma. It is grand salami time.
will send Seattle to the American League Championship Series for the first time in 24 years.
2 weeks until Mariners pitchers and catchers report to spring training. That's right, today is Thursday, January 29th, and welcome to episode 115 of the Light the W podcast. The offseason, what is the right word to use at this point? Because slow isn't the right word necessarily to use for the whole offseason. You get Josh Naylor done really quickly. You get Jose Ferrer done fairly quickly. By Christmas, you have those two guys, Andrew Kisner and Rob Refsnyder. And we're thinking, all right, how are we going to finish this off? Well, now we got 2 weeks till spring training. And it just feels like it's at a stalemate. The Mariners, the market, everything. It felt like stuff might have gotten off the board. The Mariners were going to maybe get a move done when guys started going off the board. Kyle Tucker, Cody Bellinger, Bo Bichette, Alex Bregman, those guys, that top echelon of the free agent market finally got going. Well, obviously, nothing has happened. So we sit here Thursday, January 29th. Calendar is about to flip to February, the month where spring training games start, where baseball's really getting going, and the Mariners are short one, if not two bats, and what feels like one reliever as well. The Mariners have multiple holes in their roster, and I've talked about them. Talked about them last episode on 114. And it is difficult to find guys that make sense for this team to acquire. But we're getting to the point in the offseason, for me, where you cannot be picky. Getting to the point where Jorge Polanco started to make sense again, just 12 months ago. Jorge Polanco was traded for the first time to Seattle just 2 years ago today. They signed him, obviously, in spring training, at the beginning of spring training last year again, and he had a career and is now off to Queens to play for the New York Mets at first base. Well, Polanco's off the market. Mariners brought back Josh Naylor. Many people super excited about that, including myself. But there's one guy that I haven't talked about, at least in any sort of extensive format, that the Mariners might be interested in bringing back, and that's Eugenio Suarez. If you listen to the podcast, you've listened to other episodes, you know that I am very anti bringing back Gino. I've mentioned the 36% strikeout rate that he had with Seattle over the 2 months that he was with the team. It's a volatile bat with power, but his defensive metrics are starting to fade. He's not necessarily a full-time third baseman at this point. He'll be 34 years old. This will be his age 34 season in 2026. But that said, over the past 4 years, he's been a productive bat every single year. He's been over a 3.5 win player each and every one of those years, including 3.8 win players if you're looking at FWAR, the Fangraphs format of WAR, the past 2 years. He was a 4.3 win player in 2022 in his first season at T-Mobile Park at the age of 30. He's projected to be a 2.5 win player per Fangraphs, but it depends on which format you want to look at. If you're looking at Zips, it's at a 105 WRC plus 2.7 FWAR. Steamer has him as a 108. F4. You're looking at a 105 to 110 probably WRC plus bat over the course of the entire season. But it's a bat that's really incredibly streaky. And that was part of the reason why at the deadline last year, I don't know if I talked about it necessarily on the pod, but I talked about how if the Mariners brought him in, it was entirely possible he was going to come in and have one of his cold streaks and just struggle. Well, really, that's what happened. He had been really good up to the point where he got traded to Seattle. But if you look at the months of August and then September and October, he went from being a 116 WRC plus at worst every month of the season to an 88 in August and a 94 in September and October. And wasn't good in the postseason either. Obviously, he had one of my favorite moments as a Mariners fan, one of the best moments probably in Mariners history. And it's a little bit derailed because they didn't end up completing the job. But his home run in Game 5 of the ALCS is legendary, the Grand Slam. I mean, what a moment that was. Right? But where are we at now with Gino? We're what, 3 months after that? That was October? Yeah, about 3 months. A little over 3 months since then. And it's tough to see how Gino would fit for this Mariners team. Now, that said, this is a guy that can play third base and that can DH for you and is very likely to be an above average bat over the course of 162 games. But how does T-Mobile Park affect him? How does another year older affect him? He made some swing changes to start to combat some of his aging last year that allowed him to pull more fly balls, get farther in front, and it allowed him to be more successful. His bat speed hasn't actually dropped at all. In terms of average bat speed, he's at the same rate he's been at all the past 3 years. But I talked about Dom Canzone on the last episode and fast swing rate. That's swings over 75 miles an hour. And Gino's fast swing rate went up. The length of his swing the same, bat speed the same. But the percentage of those high bat speed swings went up. Contact rate slightly up. Contact rate's about the same. And he moved further forward in the box. After being pretty far back in the box, he also became more open. Went to 24 degrees open after being 12 degrees open in 2024 and 4 degrees open in his final season with Seattle in 2023. He has a really intense upward swing. An 18-degree attack angle is really high. Really high. But it's a pull-style swing. He wants to pull the ball. And he's catching the ball further out in front than he has on the other year of his career. A 17.4%, or 17.4, inches towards the pitcher is that intercept point. That's a big difference. 8.9 in 2024 is really far. It's a big difference from 8.9 to 17.4 and 4.8 in 2023. That's allowing him to catch the ball farther out in front, pull fly balls, and that allowed him to get to the 49 home runs that he hit in 2025. It was a ton of pulled fly balls, but how does that play in Seattle? Now, you can beat the Marine Layer. You can beat what is T-Mobile Park, a hard place to hit for right-handed hitters. But I call it the funeral home for right-handed hitters, especially guys that are aging. And this guy is another one that could fall off a cliff. The biggest worry with Gino, alongside his big strikeouts, is that when he had the big strikeout numbers in Seattle, he also was walking over 10% of the time. That's good walk rates. And he's done that. And he did that prior to Seattle most years of his career. But you talk about these past 2 years, that has all of a sudden dropped. Just 7% last year and 7.7% in 2024 with Arizona. So as strikeout numbers have stayed steady, walk numbers have gone down, which means his on base has gone down. And as a guy that in Seattle had a 332 on base and a 323 on base, he went below 300 with his on base percentage last year. Well, slugging went up, and that allowed his OPS to stay somewhat similar and actually be higher than it was the year before. That on-base percentage itself is a big worry. We're not going to talk about average because average itself is outdated, but hitting 228 with a 298 on base percentage is not something that gets your juices bubbling and getting you excited. He also had a really low batting average on balls in play, 243, which is the lowest he's had since 2021 when he had a 224 batting average on balls in play. And that year he was an 85 WRC plus. Now since then, a 132, a 105, a 115, a 125 WRC plus. You can't deny that this guy at the end of the day has been a good and productive hitter. And that in of itself is something Seattle needs. And like I said, to open this episode, at this point in the offseason, I don't think Seattle's in a place to be picky. Now we'll get into what the cost and all of that is. But that's a discussion for later in this episode. The other worry with Gino is that after getting his defensive metrics up in Seattle, and that outs above average is the one we're talking about the most here, 11 outs above average in 2023 to 3 in 24 and -3 this last year, with posting a -6 defensive runs saved, which is the lowest of Eugenio Suarez's career. Now we're going to go to Baseball Savant here because we want to look purely at those outs above average and which way that range is struggling the most. Okay, so Gino is a third baseman, right? Okay, let's talk about last year. He was a -8 outs above average laterally towards third base. Now, Gino's always been really good at coming in on the ball, and he was positive. 4 outs above average there, which was double what he had in 2024. But he was bad going right and left. And when you have a shortstop in J.P. Crawford that is atrocious at going to his right towards third base, that makes that 5-6 hole on the left side a real worry. And you've brought in pitchers, well, a pitcher, Jose Ferrer, who's a ground ball pitcher. You have George Kirby, a ground ball pitcher. Gabe Spire, to an extent, somewhat of a ground ball pitcher. Edward Bizardo, to an extent. Matt Brash, Andres Munoz, all those guys like to get ground balls to get outs. And if the left side of your infield is struggling to be able to get those outs, that's a worry. Now, of course, you would have Ben Williamson likely on the roster also, and he could start games with George Kirby on the bump and come in as a defensive replacement later in games. So you could negate that issue to an extent. But then what does that do to Gino's numbers? You're cutting in at bat, maybe 2 out of each day, most days. What does that do to his overall numbers? Does that hurt them? Or does it make it more positive and it allows him to stay healthier throughout the entire season? Did Gino have an injury when he was with Seattle that allowed his numbers, made his numbers drop so significantly? Because if you want to look purely at the numbers of what Gino did with both Seattle and Arizona last year, it's pretty stark, the difference. 141 WRC plus with Arizona. This is why he was such a hot button name at the deadline. He had 248, 320 with a 576 slug. Like I said, a 141 WRC plus and an 897 OPS, striking out just 26.8% of the time, which would have been the lowest since 2018 for him. And the walk rate again was lower. He had hit 36 home runs in 106 games. But he comes to Seattle, hits just 13 home runs in 53 games, strikes out 36% of the time, hits 189, 255, 428 with a 91 WRC plus. A 36% strikeout rate. At the end of the day, My biggest reason that I have been trying to convince myself into Geno is that I don't know if you can be picky at this point, and a 30 to 35% strikeout rate or whatever it'll end up being over the course of 12 months, or not 12 months, but 162 games. If you're telling me he strikes out 30% of the time, like, all right. But if he also is hitting, 30 home runs, he hits 30 home runs, is a 105, 110 WRC plus, isn't the greatest defender, and strikes out 30% of the time, I'm saying, all right, he was an above average hitter. He brought us something. And at the end of the day, if he struggles to a really great extent, all right, here's Colt Emerson, here's Ben Williamson, and you gave it a shot in the offseason, which is something you haven't really done over the past few years. It feels like every offseason you're a bat or two short, and you get to the deadline, and here we go. One bat. You got to bring in at least one bat, and really you need two, maybe three. Mariners brought in two of the top, probably three bats at the trade deadline last year. Two of the top three that were available, and Josh Naylor and Eugenio Suarez. That's not something you're just going to be able to do every year. And they got lucky because it was one of their favorite trade partners in Arizona. And Arizona was willing to do deals with them, and they were able to, give pieces that Arizona was interested in and get those deals done. Obviously, to an extent, they both worked. But you're at a point now where even 2 weeks before the end of this, before spring training starts, I'm not sure I want to bring Geno back. And I'm having a hard time in some senses convincing myself. I've spent the past 24, 48 hours trying to convince myself that I would to somewhat get excited about the prospect of Geno coming back. And it's hard to do. It's really hard to do. If you want to go look at the postseason stats for Geno this last year, 35% strikeout rate, a 99 WRC plus, 3 home runs in 12 games, about an 8% walk rate, 213, 275, 426, 275 on base percentage. It's like the numbers themselves are just not something you get excited about. And to me, if you bring in Geno, it's like, yeah, you've, brought in another bat, and you've brought in someone where it's like, okay, he's a vet. I kind of know what I'm going to get, but I have questions. What do I really know what Geno would bring this roster, bring this team? Not really. And as we get into the money thing here, what does that contract look like? He's asking for $10 million. He wants a multi-year deal. Are the Mariners giving him 2 years, $20 million? I really don't think so. Jeff and I were talking, and is it, a 2-year deal that's worth $20 million, but the second year is, the club option, and there's maybe some incentives baked in there. It's hard to see it. And at the point where if his market comes down to it's a 1-year deal worth $10 million, what other teams are involved? Boston, are they interested? We know Pittsburgh's interested. Do teams like the Padres get interested? Houston. Could Houston even randomly somehow get interested? And they go trade Isaac Paredes. And then Geno gets the Crawford boxes, and then he hits 80 home runs. But would he want to come back to Seattle after struggling here, not being able to hit here? And he's at the point of his career where he's 34 years old. And now it's, okay, I need to make some money here before I fade out and retire. Seattle's not the place you'd want to do that, right? And I'm not saying that that's the type of guy that Geno is, right? Not at all. But at this point in his career, that's the type of thinking that he might be having. And it's a thing, it's a two-way street. He has to be interested in coming back, and they have to be interested in bringing him in. And more often than not, to bring in a guy like this, you'd have to overpay slightly. You have to overpay what Boston's offering, right? And Boston, I think, is the big team and the big question mark of what is Boston going to offer? Does Boston want this guy? If they want this guy, are they just going to go get him for whatever price it costs? Are the Yankees interested? And they can do the same thing. Screw it, are the Mets freaking interested? Who knows what they're doing? But purely if you look at the full season stats for Geno last year, 125 WRC plus, 3.8 F4, 49 home runs over 159 games, a 526 slug, like I would take that season, of course. And I would pay $10 million for that season. But is that replicable? Can he do that again? And can he do that in a Mariners uniform at T-Mobile Park? Because at the end of the day, that's the biggest question. It's so difficult. So difficult to know. Right? It's so difficult. And I want to look at stats here for Geno with Seattle last year away from home, because the stark difference of at T-Mobile Park versus not is pretty amazing. So, away from T-Mobile Park with Seattle last year, Eugenio Suarez was a 152 WRC plus, 921 OPS. He hit 280, 330, a 591 slug, 36% strikeout rate, 6% walk rate. Hit 7 home runs. That's 7 of 13 with Seattle. Had 8 doubles, 26 hits, 93 ABs. That's in 24 games. Let's look what he did at T-Mobile Park last year, because this is where it gets crazy. We talked about how bad he was overall with Seattle. Well, that comes from what he did at T-Mobile Park. He hit 111, 192, 287, 479 OPS, 41 WRC plus, 36% strikeout rate, and a 9% walk rate. He just lost all ability to hit for power, a 176 ISO. That's the lowest since 2016 for him in his career. And that's in 29 games. He had just 6 home runs, had 1 double, and just 5 singles. He had more home runs than singles, and not in a positive way. But what's interesting there is that he actually hasn't been a guy that struggled at T-Mobile Park a huge amount in his career with Seattle. The 2 years in Seattle, he had a 137 and a 119 WRC plus at T-Mobile Park. Now let's go look at what he did away from home in those seasons. Well, away from home, he was a 127 WRC plus in Seattle away from Seattle in 2022, and a 91 in 2023. So he's shown that he actually can hit at T-Mobile Park, but he's changed his swing to be more pulled fly balls. How does that work? How does a streaky hitter come to Seattle and be able to produce for what would need to be much of a full season? I think the exciting thing about the prospect of Geno would be, well, I don't see him being a whole lot worse in T-Mobile Park than he was last year. And he was really good away from T-Mobile Park. So if you tell me he's above average or average at T-Mobile Park, he's a 100 or a 105 WRC plus at T-Mobile Park, and he's, a 120, 130 away from T-Mobile Park, well, then maybe we're talking, right? Then it gets interesting. Okay. Well, now let's look at his left versus right splits. And again, we can't be picky. But what's interesting about Geno is he had reverse splits, a 137 WRC plus against righties and a 94 against lefties. He was below average against lefties. Struck out 31% of the time. He had a higher walk percentage, but the slugging was about 100 points lower. A 453 slug instead of a 552 that he had against righties. And he hit about $100 lower. The on base was about 50 points lower. How does that hold up over the course of his career? 2024, let's go look at his left-right splits. Is this a one-year thing for Geno? Seems to be, at least if you're looking at 2024, 119 versus left, 114. We're looking purely at WRC plus here against right. 2023, his last season was Seattle. 116 against left, 101 versus right. Those are more like what you expect. In 2022, he was a 165 against lefties and a 122 against righties. He actually killed lefties that year. So can he come back to life and be able to hit lefties again? And if he can do that, is there, not necessarily an uptick in his overall numbers, but can he continue somewhat what he did last year? Is it replicable? The overall numbers is what I'm sort of talking about here. And we talked about that question of is the season he just put up replicable? Well, there's clear areas where Geno could improve. But whiffing 33% of the time and striking out 29% of the time, nearly 30% of the time, it's not the way to do it. That's the 4th and 5th percentiles with those. He also chases 31% of the time in the 30th percentile. But he gets barrel percentage. His barrel percentage is high in the 89th, and his hard hit is high in the 78th. If the Mariners don't acquire him, you can expect home runs. You can expect power. But we know this guy. That's what you expect. And you're going to expect that low batting average, probably somewhat low on base percentage with a ton of strikeouts. And at this point, not great defense. He has one attribute really that he brings, and it's power to left field. Is that something you want the Mariners to bring in? Of course. But is it worth $10 million? And at this point in the offseason, does that money not really matter? Those are the questions I'm going to leave you with. Because like I've said this whole time, can't be picky. Can't be picky at this point. But he's a rough fit. And it's hard. It's really hard for me to get excited about the prospect of having this guy back. It's hard. As much as I love the guy and the vibes he brings and, the veteran leadership that he brings. But him as a purely player, it's tough to see him as a great fit for this team. And to be honest, him and JP on the left side it'd be an awful, brutal watch. That said, maybe I'll change my tune if they do end up acquiring him. We will see in the next 2 weeks because I do expect this to be a guy that signs very likely before spring training. Like I said at the opening, 2 weeks till spring training. And it's looking like I will be at spring training at the end of February. So if you're there, make sure you hit me up at Light the W Pod on all the socials. You can hit me up there if you're going to be there. But till next week. And next week, we're going to talk about some more potential trade targets that are hard to see how they could fit at this point because trades at this point, especially for competing teams, are difficult to see how they come together. That said, thank you guys so much for listening. As always, go M's. Please, Jerry, make some moves. And peace.